Hello, and welcome to the Consider Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Eric King, and along with my co-host, Mino Pachan, we're here to talk about all things mental health. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Consider Your Mind podcast. I'm your gracious host, Eric King, and this is episode 42. 42nd and final episode of season 1, year 1 of the Consider Your Mind podcast. Always such a blessing. I thank you that you all are here listening to us. And if you've been rocking with us all year, man, hey, thank you so much. And if you're brand new to the podcast, hey, thank you even more because it's been a heck of a journey, man. And just coming off this holiday season, Merry Christmas to everybody that celebrates. And then, coming up here to this New Year's, a lot's been going on. And particularly this time of the year, particularly pertinent for the message and the theme of the Consider Your Mind podcast, which is mental health. Being around family, or again, the family that you're not able to be around anymore, as you take losses. It can be very difficult for people. Really going through it, during this time. It's a joyous time, a time of opening presents. It was my first Christmas as a father, getting to be around my little man and everything like that. I got to spend Christmas Eve with him, open presents, things like that. It's a blessed time for me. However, some people out there, this is a much more difficult time. So with that, I kind of want to transition into this last topic of the year. And I've been hinting at it. I've been alluding to it, these last few episodes with, Steve. Shout out to Mr. More Beats, holding it down with me, co-hosting. And, it's this theme of authenticity versus attachment. Okay. Yeah. Authenticity versus attachment. And it's something that, kind of got brought to my attention through therapy. As you all know who follow the podcast, this all began on my journey, personal journey into therapy, bettering my mental health. And some of the tools that my therapist brought me to led me to a person named Gabor Mate. And, he's a former, doctor, physician, used to deliver babies, actually. And, he's transitioned his work into, the world of trauma, mental health, looking at illness and, what brings it about. So his work has been really influential, especially this last year, as I've dealt with so much, change and, trauma, honestly, and change in my life, to have some tools and perspective on things has really helped me. So one of those things like these concepts has really helped me. And I wanted to share with you all is, again, authenticity versus attachment. So authenticity, being oneself, being true, authentic, the real McCoy, the real thing. I think this world does a good job of telling us who we are, who we're supposed to be, sending us messages, how we're supposed to look, act, feel, dress, whatever it is. But kind of what can get lost in that is who we really are, what we really feel, who we really actually, are as people sometimes isn't as valued, or it gets lost, or sometimes we get, again, told who that is to the point where, we suppress our own selves and don't even know who that is. And so that need for authenticity, is very real in our lives. And but we also have another need. We have the need for attachment. Our lives, start off, we're very vulnerable. Every last one of us, is here alive today because some attachment need was filled. We're babies, we cry, we're reaching out, we're, to get our needs literally met from adults. We adapt certain behaviors, we adapt certain things, stand in line, get in line, be silent, whatever it is, to appease the adults in our lives, to appease those attachment relationships, because it's literally our survival depends on it. And so we develop, patterns of behavior. We develop certain, ways of being to preserve those attachment relationships that are survival, literally. And so, but we don't realize that, a lot of times as we grow up, what those survival things still in us are. What things are still there that need to be worked out. Our kind of origin story, so to speak, in a hero villain type of way, our origin story, to figure out what that is, because as we, the things that helped us survive, the things that helped us survive a lot of times aren't what's going to help us now. That's not what's going to, bring us to the next level of our life. And so when we're younger, our need for attachment is more, but as we get older, obviously our need to be ourselves, the need to be authentic becomes more and more important to us. And it's that tension between our authentic selves and those attachments. And a lot of times we do feel like if we are our authentic selves, if we are our true selves, they really see who I am, that you will lose those attachments. It's a risk. And a lot of times people, because of that fear, they never show themselves. They never, break out of that. And there's physical consequences to it. There's mental consequences of that suppression of yourself. One way, I really like how he looks at it is, a disorder or abnormality, in our body, in our response to the environment. But our body's having a very normal response to an abnormal environment. The environment is toxic, if the circumstances are toxic, these things are, our body is having a natural reaction to that in the defense of itself. Now, it's just that we get used to being in these toxic environments. We think this is normal, but our bodies are the ones that are, keeping the stress. It kind of keeps the score. That's kind of allusion to one of Gabor Mate's books, you know. And so when we look at illness, it represents a dysfunction in the body, whether it's a backache, a twinge, a headache, or whatever it is. These little things, a numbing on the side of your body, or whatever it is. Sometimes these are warning signs within our body that are telling us, hey, this is a canary in the coal mine. Hey, something is amiss, you know. And so but we're in a culture that has really normalized this stuff. And it's something that, the more and more I've done reading, the more the year that I've been doing this podcast, I've really started to look at it and just look how much we just normalize dysfunction, to the point where issues of chronic pain, chronic illness, these things are, manifesting within our body as a reaction to a toxic culture. One of the things, in the research, it found that workplace stress was most closely related to physical illness, actually. So, the work stress of maybe losing your job, or, having a bad boss, that insecurity within your work, it can actually, that's the type of stress that's most associated with bodily illness. So those sick days that you have to take, those personal days that you have to take, literally because your body is waking up dreading, the toxic environment that it's got to go back to, and it's our body's, again, natural reaction, to that. Trauma is an external event, something that happens to us that, again, it goes internalized. The effects of the trauma are something that we witness, something that's happening to us externally, but it's felt, it's manifested within ourselves. And so we kind of, think pain is normal. But when we look back on it, uh, we can kind of look at those times like, what, that was wrong. With that environment that my parents or whoever's in charge of me or responsible for me, what, that was wrong. I didn't grow up in the, this type of situation that was bad for me, that we thought was normal at the time. But looking back at it, dealing with the people who maybe should have looked out for us, done better for us, but they didn't, having to really deal with that, in a mature way going forward, so that you're not, living in the past and it's dragging you back. But at the same time, you're not ignoring it, because going forward, you don't want it reared. You don't want that rearing its ugly head, so to speak. Again, going back to the theme of the show, authenticity versus attachment. Looking back, again, kind of those environmental regrets, but think about those internal regrets that you have, where you violated your authenticity, when you really weren't being your real self. So looking back at a time when you weren't being your real self with regret, that can be traumatic. I'm gonna say it again. Those times when you weren't your authentic self, when you regret those times, when you look back on those, are actually, traumas that happened in our lives where we couldn't be ourselves. We felt weak. Our authentic selves was suppressed. And again, how we deal with that, internally. Again, all of us are guilty of it. How many times do we suppress our true selves just to be accepted, just to be part of the group, just to fit in, just to, be part of the clique, whatever it is. We lose touch with our authentic selves, our authenticity, for the sake of acceptance. Again, I raise my hand as guilty. I have definitely been, guilty of that, losing touch with my authentic self, violating what I want to do personally, how I actually feel, violating my own emotions, needs, wants, for the sake of appeasement, of the group, or acceptance, or those attachment relationships. I violated my authenticity, and again, it's too big for blame, because everybody's done it. This is something we're really taught and trained to do, again, as a kid, to maintain those attachment relationships with adults. Stand in line, sit down, finish your food. We're giving this instructions on what you need to be in order to get love, what you need to be in order to get taken care of, to be considered a good little boy or girl. So we're well trained in that stuff. But again, we have to be cognizant of how that affects us, in our adult lives. And then now, being your authentic self while still trying to maintain relationships, That's hard enough, and risking that tension. But then you put other factors onto it, our societal pressures surrounded around race, around gender, those intersectionalities. It leads to some, serious consequences that I really don't think a lot of times we think all the way through. I know I didn't think of it as deeply until I started researching it. So things like internalized racism and the effects that can have literally on your, mental and physical health. When you take on one's, internalizing racism really is you take on another person's view of yourself. Okay. One taking on another person's view of themselves. So it's one thing if I, as a black man, you know, hear somebody call me, something out of my name, something derogatory, something to demean me, telling me that all black people do this, all black men don't take care of the children, all da 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 da, whatever stereotype or whatever it is to demean me. Now it's one thing for me to hear that, and it to hurt my feelings and dang, that's messed up that they're saying that about me. Now it's a whole nother thing if I then internalize that and that's how I start viewing myself. The trauma, the stress or whatever of taking on another's view of you, as yourself, again, we're still kind of measuring out the damage that does, but it does take a physical toll, even within our DNA, the markers of aging. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into the research on that. That's for another show. But again, so many markers of aging, particularly in Black women in their 30s, are several years ahead of their, white female counterparts. Just, economically, if you factor in all those things, level those out, it's still ahead because, again, stress, just the stress, again, of being in a sexist world and a racist world. It can really, wreak havoc on one's mental well-being, but again, that also manifests physically. It manifests in ways that we take for granted. How many people, again, especially Black people, high blood pressure, hypertension, inflammation in the body, we just take these things, the sugar, diabetes, whatever it is. We're so used to people, having these health issues in our communities, particularly even at a young age, as young as their 30s, or 40s. And so, markers of inflammation are higher in people of color. Because of that very thing, markers of inflammation are higher in people of color, and women make up 70 to 80% of the autoimmune diseases. So, where the body kind of attacks itself, lupus and the like, they make up the majority of that. And again, it's a disease of taking on stress, of, internalizing, absorbing these things. The society really uses women as the shock absorbers for society. That's a term that Gabor Mate, kind of used it. And I can definitely, kind of see that. They're expected, again, especially in the pandemic, COVID, you have to take care of more of the kids at home. Who was bearing more of that responsibility? Who was bearing more of the brunt of the child rearing even then? It's something that, again, it's an undue burden that we do put on women, but it's seen as normalized. And there's a consequences to it. So yeah, the more stress, the more isolated, and the less support you have. Again, all markers of what we just went through with the pandemic, it really exacerbated things. And so things like, again, multiple sclerosis, MS, that's 3 times, the rate in women as opposed to men. And it's a stress driven disease, for the most part. And so, again, going back to the theme, authenticity versus attachment, internalizing that stress, suppressing one's authenticity, one's true self, and support or, in service, to the greater good, quote unquote, or what you're supposed to be doing. How many times when people are suppressing their no, when they feel like they have the inability to say no, the body will say it for them in a form of illness. Again, if we don't say no, eventually our bodies will. And it's something, again, in this, new year, in this holiday season, being around family members, being around friends, being around people that you've had to grow up with, had to, spend a long time having relationships with these people that were dependent on the attachment relationship, having a long time of doing that. And now as you're getting older, trying to be your authentic self with these people. Now that tension, you're all grown up now, maybe even have your own kids, have your own hopes, dreams, whatever. But you're still around, certain people or certain environments that still, view you in a certain way, leave you stuck in that way. Want you to still violate your authenticity, who you've become, who you've developed into, the work you've done on yourself. They want you to, again, compromise or violate or suppress that in order for them to have that same relationship with you where they're comfortable with. Maybe that's a whole nother podcast. People keeping you right where they need you to be, right where they like you to be. It's like if you all grew up, everybody was broke. It's cool if everybody was broke, but all of a sudden somebody gets some money, they ain't so happy no more. It was all different when y'all was all down together. So yeah, so again, it's something to really think about. Getting back on the topic of at hand, our need for authenticity. My heart goes out to those people in certain communities, of alternative lifestyles, LGBT and the like, that throughout their lives, up until very recently, had to suppress, and still to a degree definitely have to suppress again who they are for the sake again of relationships, attachments, family, things like that. And in the past, people just, for the sake of getting along, they did some extreme things to the point of, marrying people that they, weren't even sexually orientated to, but it wasn't acceptable to do otherwise. I believe it was Robert De Niro. Everybody knows the actor Robert De Niro, great actor. His father, he made a movie about his father, who was a painter. He was an artist, and, he was gay, but he couldn't, that wasn't acceptable way back then. I think De Niro was born in the 40s or 30s or something like that, 40s. And no, you couldn't, necessarily live that lifestyle and everything just be okay. There was, violence in addition to societal suppression. So again, the years, the decades, how long have people had to, violate, their true authentic selves, who they actually are, again, in the service of the community, in the service of attachments to get along. To the point, I think I've heard it, there was a term way back in the day, tangent, when I used to watch Sex and the City when it came on TBS. Okay, so after the whole show was over and I'm in college, way back, they're showing it on TBS and they used to run it all the time. And so I'm watching this show, and there was one episode where I think it's Samantha. She was the one that was out there. She had a lot of partners, so to speak. She was the player. She had like this young model dude or something like that, or something, and people thought that he was gay. She said like, okay, it must be something like, okay, he must be gay. He's using her to cover it up, like a beard. The term was beard. She's his beard. Like this is his way to prove that he's, a man. This keeps his masculinity intact by having a woman, even though he doesn't, live that lifestyle. So that was kind of one of my first, playing it straight type of introductions to, again, the things people will do, even terms for it, to blend in society. But the damaging effects that has, half of the citizens in the U.S., the richest nation in the world, have some type of chronic condition. The United States of America, God bless it. Literally, at least like half of adults have some type of chronic condition like high blood pressure or diabetes. Shout out to my man Mino, always a part of the show. Never forget you. Again, one of the things that, early on before the kidney thing happened with him, it was, diabetes. And again, my African American folks, my brothers and sisters, how many times, how often, how common is high blood pressure and diabetes, within our communities, to the point where, yeah, my mama don't even cook with salt. We're used to not even putting salt in the stuff. We'd be afraid of it just because, it's such a rampant thing. But how much of that has to do with, again, the stress of the society, what it's actually putting under us. We think this is, an abnormality. We think it's an illness, but no, it's our body's actual, a normal reaction to the crazy environment, the toxic environment, that we're in. We are all in a civilization that demands the denial of our human needs. We get disconnected because it's too painful to be ourselves. It's sometimes it can be painful. Again, what's it going to cost you? I can be myself. I can, be my authentic self. Yeah, I am me. You hear me roar, but what's it going to risk you? Are you still going to be able to have that job? Are you still going to be able to have, see your family? Are you still going to get invited to Thanksgiving, to Christmas? You can still get invited to the New Year's party? Coming to peace with that, within ourselves. Because again, we're in a society that says, what, forget those needs, to the point where, again, I'm working with Codependence Anonymous, to the point where I'm guilty of it as myself. I've had a difficult time identifying my needs, my own, needs for real. To the point where Danae, shout out to my homegirl in the group, she asks, okay, if you're in like, what do you need in a relationship? We're talking about relationships. And I'm like, I don't even know. Now you should mention it. It was a humbling kind of moment, like, I'm, 30, 34 years old, about to be 35, coming up this next year in 2023. And yeah, I can say I've been so used to suppressing my own needs in relationships, really not asking for what I want, that dang near, like, now I can't even really articulate it. Perhaps somewhere along the line, I got even felt guilty for having those needs, and kind of unpacking that about myself, because that ain't that's not gonna serve me well, in the future. Dang, how I'm gonna be in a relationship, any successful functioning, relationship with any type of woman, if I can't even tell them, what I need, that's setting them up for failure. But okay, where does that come from? So hence the work, hence this episode. Somewhere along the way, I got told that my authentic selves or my needs and who I really am isn't acceptable, in a relationship. A woman maybe won't accept that, from me. So got to do some unpacking, of that trauma. Because trauma isn't the bad things that happen, to us. It's not the bad things that happen to you, but what happens inside as a result of what happens to you. Let me repeat it again for the slow class, myself included. Trauma isn't about the bad thing that happens to you, but it's what happens inside as a result of what happens to you. See, we can see a physical bruise. Somebody hits you, you can, see, the swelling. There's a marker. There's the inflammation, the body's reaction, to heal that area, sends blood to it, whatever it is, to a wound. But okay, that's the outside wound. You can mark that. You can put it in a cast. The doctor can tell you, okay, in 6 weeks you can take off this cast. It'll be healed. Da, da, da. But what about the internal, whatever, maybe something resulted from that, accident, or, physical ailment, that bruise, whatever happened behind that, the violence, that generated behind that happens to us internally, that we take on. There's no hey, you know what, just keep this cast on your heart for 5 to 6 weeks. No, it don't work like that. Keep this cast on your emotions. Make sure you change the gauze around your heart, in your feelings. Change your feelings gauze every so many hours. Nah, it doesn't really work like that. And in those internal wounds, the what we internalize as a result of that internal, as a consequences of that external trauma, can many times take much longer to heal than the physical wounds themselves. So it can be like, oh, get over it. Well, as we know, again, if anybody out there watches boxing or MMA, any type of fighting or whatever, what they talk about, a puncher, sometimes they take a certain knockout, they get hit a certain way, and boom, and that could be it for them. Their confidence is shook. Before, they were real confident that, hey, boom, boom, I'm good. Everything is fine. They're winning. But all of a sudden, bam, they take the shot, and they could never be the same. Even though the physical could have healed, they look, oh man, you look good, man. You ready to get back in there? You ready to fight again? You ready to get that rematch? And that person could look hesitant, like, physically I'm fine. My body's ready to go again. It's ready to train. Pay-per-view. they try to, book this thing again. But from a mental standpoint, internally, that was the difference between a lot of fighters. Can they bounce back, mentally, from that, that trauma? So again, that's the professional side of it, people that sign up for that. But again, we can apply it to ourselves, because we go through it as well. Again, it's just not, in boxing rings and in octagons. We do it again in relationships, the sparring that goes back and forth in relationships, not just physical, but the verbal things people say to us, and how we internalize those things, the stuff that stays with us. Because going back to the theme of the show, authenticity versus attachment, that attachment thing, we don't want to be lonely, and it's bad for our health. Loneliness is bad for, we don't want to encourage isolation. We want to encourage cutting off unhealthy attachments, unhealthy relationships. But this is never about isolation. That is not good for your health. In fact, being lonely and isolated causes inflammation in the body and suppresses the immune system, actually. So that's bad for you. Makes you more susceptible, again, suppress your immune system, more susceptible, to other illnesses. And again, causes the inflammation, things, chronic issues to happen, can happen in your body internally. So yeah, loneliness is bad. Loneliness can make you sick. However, being in unhealthy, toxic attachment relationships, that can also make you sick. So, so Shout out to therapy and the group work that we do, so we learn to differentiate and how to stay in the middle, how to develop healthy relationships, and so that we and not to avoid trauma because it's impossible. There's going to be traumas, there's going to be things that happen to us, but we getting better at how we internalize it. How we truly internalize that to not hold us back going forward and keep us moving forward in a healthy way. A lot of progress has been made in this area because so many people, as I mentioned, I mentioned lupus, I mentioned diabetes, high blood pressure, all these autoimmune diseases, inflammation in the body, all these things. There's so many people out there that have them. However, they get medication for it, they get a diagnosis for it, they get this, that, and the third for it. However, those are treating the symptoms. There's a lot of, okay, that pops up, here's a pill for this. This pops up. Oh, well, you're probably feeling like this. Use this for this many weeks or whatever it is. But unfortunately, the underlying issues are never addressed. The traumas behind those things are never addressed. One of the episodes that we did earlier, I think in the summer, and it was about obesity. It was about eating disorders, period. But I did spotlight obesity. And again, the TV shows and things, the way we kind of view it and the way we portray it, it's really kind of more entertaining almost. It's not, we're using people's sickness and looking at dying people as entertainment, But if you're really listening to these people, they'll tell you the trauma that, caused them to start overeating, to suppress their feelings with food, to drown whatever it is. There was one that I saw recently, again, randomly, because they're on a lot. And I'm watching it, and a woman said, she was, 600, plus maybe 800 pounds, something like that. But she said the trauma that was really, messing with her, that stayed with her was when she was like 15 or 16, had a boyfriend, and, he brought her to a cabin, and, she had her cousins and stuff. He had his cousins and friends and stuff there. And, they went upstairs and, lost her virginity to him. She said yes to him, as she said. But then the other, the friends came, the cousins and the and they all, slept with her without her permission, So she was literally sexually assaulted. It was her first, sexual experience was, a traumatic one. And that has stayed with her. And it was literally, she was, eating her feelings, trying to suppress those things, not dealing with them. And it was, it was going to kill her. And so throughout the show, it was great to, she was able to actually talk that out, really get, to really talk that out, literally, just to say it out loud, to, to get it out so she can get the work, done. By the end of the episode, she had lost a whole bunch of weight, got in contact with a old boyfriend from back in the day, not that one, but a different one, that had been recently divorced and everything, so, but literally the root of it, nothing changed though, going back to the thing, until she got, to the root of it, to that trauma. And so that place where she wasn't her authentic self, her place was violated. She felt like she couldn't express herself. She was, something happened to that trauma, once she was able to overcome that, once it was able to, the internal was correct, then that started to reflect on the external. And I think that's the way a lot of this stuff works, man. So, but with that, what was encouraging it through the show, as I'm saying, I'm mentioning this, is because that was what I think was coined by Gabor Mate too. At least that's when I first saw it, was trauma informed medical care and education. So that, like, in light of, hey, actually, you got to figure out where this stuff comes from. Because, you can tell a person to get on a diet. You can tell a person to stop eating a certain thing that's bad for them, that's going to be killing them. But if you don't address the underlying reason why they keep doing that, again, drug addiction, same thing. If you don't address the underlying reason why this person keeps sticking a needle in their arm in the first place, you're spinning your wheels. Nothing's going to get done. You may be able to modify behavior temporarily, but it's going to be real hard for you to tell somebody to stop taking something or stop using something that kills the pain. So that makes them, feel better, even if it's temporary. That's going to be a tough sell. So, but again, that's our sell here, I guess, in the mental health space in the Consider Your Mind podcast. Don't take that, don't put that down. Nope. You don't need that. Do some internal work, go into your mind and see where it comes from, and you'll be better for it though. So again, but going back to it, man, what we consider is normal is neither natural or healthy, man. What this society tells us is normal, this consumer society, and we're marketing continually the things that we're told we need, period. And none of them bring us happiness, none of them bring us joy, none of them bring us contentment, but it does bring us pleasure. And as we talked about, I think in the previous episode, does money buy you happiness? No, but it's so close you can't tell the difference. You know, is pleasure the same as happiness? No, but if you can't get happiness, boy, that pleasure will do. But the issue with that is, you need another hit. That's that dope. Need another hit. Need another hit. Dope, man. Please, can I have another hit? For the old heads out there. So, the pathologies and disorders are just our body's normal response to an abnormal culture. Our pathologies, our disorders, something that's disordered in our body is because something is disordered in the environment. It's a reflection. Um, so it's not to. It goes from the micro turns into the macro. In that sense. So there are no clear lines between normal and abnormal. So there's a spectrum, though. You know what I'm saying? There's really, I like how they put that. There's no clear line between normal and abnormal. So there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of woundedness. Just like, again, an earlier episode when we talked about being on the spectrum, literally for, autism. And so, there's a spectrum of woundedness, as well. So again, it's not a one size fits all. Not everybody reacts the same thing, even to the same trauma, or internalize it the same way. So, so trauma's original meaning, was a wound in the body, but in psychological terms, it's a wound of the psyche and the soul. So there's the physical, trauma. Again, like I spoke about earlier, somebody hits you, there's a bruise or whatever, your body's rushing blood to the area. You can see the healing process that's going on. So that's the physical trauma. But in the psychological terms, that term is about your psyche, and your soul, who you are. You can really be hurt to your core by some things, that can never manifest physically, but that trauma can, it can cripple who you believe you are. It can cripple your authenticity, literally, suppress it, put it down even more, create a real fear in you. So, trauma is the psychic wound that we sustain. It's not the event, because the events are traumatic. That's a clear distinction. We go through traumatic events, but in terms of the actual trauma that we hold in with us, that's psychological. So differentiating between the trauma event itself and then what we take with us from that event. When we walk away from the scene of the crime, when we see the accident, whatever it is, as we're witness to this, that's what's going on at that time. If we were getting hurt, abused, what's being done to us at that time. But what we take with us, that's what we're focusing on. That's where the true work really is, so that we cope with those things. That's the word, COPE, cope. How do you cope with the world? And again, we just want to do it in healthy ways. How do you cope? Some people do it with drugs, some people do it with alcohol, again, overeating, sex, whatever it is. They reach out for these things to cope with the situation. And unfortunately, our society, certain things, again, I just mentioned vices that people may consider bad to cope with, but some people get praised for the way they cope. Shout out to all the workaholics out there. Oh yeah, the workaholics. They just bury themselves in work, so they don't have time to grieve, more, and think, whatever it is. But what we're really trying to cope with, is something bigger. If you're a workaholic, you're trying to make yourself maybe feel important. This is how I can make myself feel important, feel useful. Some person's way to cope with maybe feeling like the world doesn't want them. If you feel like you're rejected before, if you feel like you're not good enough, if you're, again, some people deal with this with being adopted, that acceptance thing, not feeling good enough, feelings of rejection. One way people do, cope with that is to make themselves important, make themselves integral, workaholics, things like that, to, again, always trying to prove their worth and their value. And again, unlike some other ways that people cope, this one's praised, but the stress that causes, for your worth to be tied to your job all the time and your production. What if you get hurt ever? What if those are people, again, something happens, a downturn, you get fired, whatever it is, and all of a sudden that person's life is destroyed. So we want to make sure we're coping in healthy ways and not using things like work, like sex, like food, like what. Those are very natural things that we, desire, need. However, you don't want to be using those in an abusive manner in order to deal with trauma. turn a blessing to a curse, you know. So yeah, man. Again, remember, it's not about the trauma itself, but what we make it mean. So that's what I want to leave y'all with. It's not about the trauma itself; it's what we make it mean. So going back with the theme of this show, our authenticity. We're thinking back to, hey, where did I violate my authenticity? Where did I violate my real self? Suppress who I am for the sake of going along, getting along, acceptance with the others, the group, or whatever it is, and really unpacking those traumatic events and times in life that, again, sometimes we even just slide over. But I think some of you guys go take away from this episode. Think back. All right, when did you violate who you are, your real self, for the sake of those attachments? Again, I think many of us probably have pretty good examples, especially if you're around some family in the holidays. Some can be a little more innocent than others. We all gonna be on our best behavior in front of grandma for sure. We're not gonna just be wilding out. We may suppress some things. However, again, it's something to be cognizant of. Are you around people where you feel like you can't be your authentic self? Are you around certain groups? Are you in environments? Are you beholden to certain attachments, to certain things and people that cause you to violate your authentic self? Let me tell you, people, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I'm learning to do better myself because I don't want to have none of these, again, stuff happens, man. Things go wrong in the body. I don't want to help it along. I'm trying to cut down on my risk of autoimmune, issues, inflammatory issues in my body. So my mental health is definitely a big part of my physical health as well. There's very little. This ain't church and state, man. There's no separation between the body, what we go through, and the mind, and how we internalize it, and what we make it mean. So make it count, people. Make your life meaningful. Make everything meaningful for you as you go into this 2023 in the new year. And again, Merry Christmas to everybody that celebrated, and all that. Hope you all had a great time with your families. And as we head into this new year, into the 2023 year, my challenge to you all, and of course to myself, then, is to be our most authentic selves this year. 2023, the year of authenticity. All right, man. So, hey, season 1 in the books, 42 episodes. We originally wanted to do 52, one for every week. We had a good streak going on there, but life happens, and we roll with the punches, literally, ever since that episode. Check it out. It's been a journey, and I thank you all for rocking, with us so much, man. Again, keep my boy Mino in y'all prayers. You know what I'm saying? My co-host, my co-founder, this whole Consider Your Mind thing. That's our guy. So again, keep him lifted up, and be good to yourself and others, people. And again, 2023, the year of authenticity. So until next time, peace.